All right, so today we're going deep on Bob Camblin.
Bob Camblin, yeah.
Houston artist and learner. You've given us a lot to work with here.
Yeah, you really have.
We've got his quotes, excerpts from a biography, reviews of books with his art, and then some of your own thoughts.
Reflections, yeah.
So kind of our mission today is to just really try and pull out the juiciest bits here and get a sense of this guy's...
A real sense of his life and his art.
Yeah, like what made him pick.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So for you, learner, and anyone who might be listening, Bob Camblin, pretty big name actually in the Houston art scene, but a bit of an enigma.
Yeah, I would say so.
Born back in 1928 in Oklahoma, developed a really unique style.
Iconoclastic.
Iconoclastic, yeah, and really respected by other artists and collectors, sought after.
Yeah, sought after.
And he worked in a lot of different media.
Variety.
Yeah.
All sorts of stuff, so.
And some pretty profound themes, too.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he went deep.
He did.
And so, yeah, today, specifically, what we want to do is give you a sense of, like, the core ideas. Yeah, what drove him? What was he all about?
Yeah, the influences that shaped him, and maybe even some of the paradoxes.
Those little puzzles and contradictions.
Yeah, the things that don't quite add up, but that make him so interesting.
Right, exactly.
And we're going to try and do it in a way that gives you, like, those aha moments without...
Without the information overload.
Yeah, just the good stuff.
Just the good stuff.
So, to kick us off, I found this quote really interesting. He said, "Fortunately, some things remain forever, or another 10 years, perhaps."
That's a good one.
What do you make of that?
Well, I think what strikes me right away is this tension between permanence,
right,
and then this almost winky, like a little bit of skepticism about forever,
yeah,
to say forever, and then immediately say, well, maybe 10 years?
Maybe not.
Exactly. I like that. It's very grounded. You know, or a real sense of the passing of time.
Yeah, and maybe that things aren't always as fixed as we think they are.
Exactly.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about his philosophy.
Okay, let's do it.
It seems like embracing paradox was a big part of how he thought.
I would agree with that.
And this quote kind of exemplifies that. He said, "Look into the atom, you get what you need. Look into magic, and you get what you need. Philosophy and art are in both."
So that's a pretty bold statement.
Yeah, it is.
I mean, he's really saying that you can find truth in these seemingly totally different places.
Right.
The atom representing science, the measurable world.
Like hard facts.
Exactly. And then magic, which is all about mystery and intuition and things we can't really explain.
Yeah.
And he's saying that both philosophy and art live in both of those realms.
Yeah, so they're not separate.
They're connected somehow. Yeah. And I think that's really interesting, especially in the art world, where you often have this divide between...
Like very heady conceptual art.
Right. Very cerebral,
yeah.
Just pure feeling.
Yeah, yeah.
But Camblin is saying there's something fundamental underneath both of them.
Yeah, like they're both searching for something.
Yeah, a truth and understanding.
Yeah, and that brings us to this idea of the perfectly average.
Ah, yes. The perfectly average.
Which is a really strange concept.
It is a little quirky, isn't it?
Yeah, but here's what he said about it. "I will stick with common sense and try for the perfectly average view of the universe. I think that will let me enjoy miracles on both sides of science and magic, and the nuances of the smear between the whiteness and the blackness, and hope that I can be around when the two meet in the near future, and we have an intensely bright gray."
Okay, so unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, there's a lot in there.
There is.
So what do you think he means by this perfectly average?
Well, I don't think he's talking about being mediocre or just settling for the ordinary.
Right.
It's more like this neutral balanced perspective.
Okay.
Where you can see both sides, the rationale, the scientific, and the mystical, the magical.
Exactly.
Without getting too caught up in one or the other.
Yeah.
And from that place, from that middle ground, you can appreciate the miracles in both.
Oh, I see.
And I love that image of the intensely bright gray.
Yeah.
Where those two opposites meet.
Yeah, it's like a richer, more nuanced understanding.
Exactly. It's not black and white. It's this vibrant gray.
I like that.
Okay.
Okay, so then he says this about the sixth sense, which I found interesting.
Okay.
He says, "The sixth sense is to be, without a doubt, senza dubio, no doubt."
So he's redefining intuition.
Yeah, it's not about like psychic powers or anything. It's about this deep certainty.
Conviction.
Yeah, like you just know.
And I think for an artist, that's really important to have that unwavering belief in your vision.
Especially when you're doing something new.
Right, when you're pushing boundaries.
Yeah.
But it's also a way of understanding the world in general.
Like trusting your gut.
Exactly, even if you can't explain it logically.
Yeah, and then he talks about the purpose of art, which I think evolved for him over time.
Okay, how so?
Well, he said this: art is not just images. Art for art's sake has become art for life's sake, or art for my sake, or art for survival's sake.
So he's moving away from this idea of art as just something beautiful.
Right, like purely aesthetic.
Yeah, it has to be more than that.
Right, it has to connect to life.
To the human experience.
Yeah, and I think art for my sake is interesting.
What do you think he means by that?
I think it's about the artist's own need to express themselves.
Yeah, their own personal journey.
Yeah, and then art for survival's sake
It's
is
over
like,
primal.
yeah, like art as a way to cope with the world.
To make sense of it all.
Yeah,
Wow, that's a powerful progression.
it is. And then he says this, which I just love because it's so evocative. Step off the train of thought to find the power that is no power, to do the work that is not work, to laugh the true laugh. Bending is not bowing.
Okay, that's beautiful.
Right.
There's so much there.
Yeah, it's like a Zen koan.
It is. It's about letting go of that rigid linear thinking.
Right.
And finding a different kind of power.
Like a power that comes from surrender.
Exactly. The power of non-resistance.
Yeah. And then the work that is not work.
Effortless action.
You know, like being in flow.
Yeah, that state where you're just completely absorbed.
And then bending is not bowing.
That's my favorite.
It's so good.
It's about being flexible, adapting.
Without losing yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Wow.
And then lastly, in this sort of philosophy section, he gives us this instruction.
Okay.
When you think, don't act. When you act, don't think.
He's really separating those two modes.
Right, like there's a time for thinking.
Planning, strategizing.
Yeah, and then there's a time for just doing.
Letting go and trusting your instincts.
Yeah.
So interesting.
It is. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit
Mm-hmm.
and talk about some of the influences that shaped him.
Okay, sounds good.
So we know he grew up in Ponca City, Oklahoma,
Okay.
and it sounds like that environment had a big impact on him.
How so?
Well, it was during the oil boom. So there was this incredible wealth.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and these grand landmarks like the Marland Estate and
Yeah.
the Pioneer Woman statue.
Yeah.
But then the oil industry declined.
Oh, so he saw both sides of that boom and bust cycle.
Exactly. And I think that gave him a sense of,
Impermanence.
yeah, like nothing lasts forever.
Right.
And then, of course, there's The Wizard of Oz,
A classic.
which he saw as a kid.
And that must have really captured his imagination.
Oh, yeah, all that vivid imagery and the fantastical journey.
Yeah, and the themes of self-discovery and imagination.
Yeah, it's all there.
It really is.
So then he goes on to study art formally at the Kansas City Art Institute,
Okay.
and then he gets a Fulbright scholarship to Italy.
Wow, so he gets to go to Europe.
Yeah, and that seems like it was a really pivotal experience for him.
In what way?
Well, he was really taken by the Grand Masters and the Impressionists,
Of course. I mean, who wouldn't be?
right? But he specifically mentions the Uffizi Gallery.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and the Capuchin catacombs in Palermo.
Interesting.
Yeah, with those mummies.
Oh, yeah, those are pretty striking.
Yeah, and then he describes Venice as his Emerald City.
Like from The Wizard of Oz.
Exactly.
So he's still carrying that with him.
Yeah, it's like he's finding those magical places in the real world.
And those mummies, I mean, they're kind of abstract,
Right.
but also figurative.
Yeah, and a little bit creepy. So it's like he's already starting to think about the body
Neutrality.
was for me.
All those themes that we see in his later work.
Yeah, so then he comes back to the States and teaches for a while
Okay.
before fully committing to his art in 1976.
Got it.
And it seems like collaboration was really important to him.
Oh, yeah. How so?
Well, he had these close partnerships with other Houston artists, like
Okay.
Earl Staley and Joe Tate,
Okay.
and they formed this group called B&E Productions.
Interesting. What do they do?
They did all sorts of collaborative events.
Like happenings.
Yeah, kind of like
Okay.
they were really challenging the traditional art world.
In what way?
Well, they didn't care about individual fame or recognition.
Right.
They would often sign their work as anonymous.
Wow. So they were really emphasizing the art itself.
Not the ego.
Yeah. That's pretty radical.
It is. And then in the 1980s, he develops this really unique style with Nancy Giordano.
Like, what was it called?
It was called Mouches Volantes.
Mouches volantes. What does that mean?
It means flying flies.
Flying flies.
Yeah, and it refers to those little floaters you sometimes see in your vision.
Oh, I see.
And basically, they would use these patterns of dots and dashes to create optical illusions.
Like Escher or Dolly.
Exactly.
That's so cool.
Yeah, like they were playing with how we see.
Yeah, making the viewer work to perceive the image.
Yeah, and throughout his career, there are these themes that keep popping up.
Like what?
Well, the life cycle metamorphosis.
Okay.
And he uses these recurring motifs like puppets, scarecrows, skulls,
Interesting.
and these glass reliquaries with murky water in them.
Oh, that's creepy.
Yeah, and it seems like he was drawing on all sorts of influences like Freud.
Ah, the subconscious.
Yeah, de Chirico.
Dreamlike imagery.
Grunwald.
Intense emotionality.
Yeah, and then authors like Kazantzakis and Grass.
Those are some heavy hitters.
Yeah, he was a deep thinker.
Seems like it.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about his character.
Okay, let's get personal.
Yeah, so this quote, I think, is really revealing. I cannot tell a lie to myself for very long. Camblin, 1974. Find something in nature that completes you and then surrender.
Wow, that's powerful.
Right.
He's not messing around with self-deception.
You know, he's all about honesty.
Radical honesty.
Yeah, and then that connection to nature.
Finding something that completes you and then surrendering to it.
Yeah, like giving yourself over to something bigger.
Yeah, losing yourself to find yourself.
Yeah, and then we have this other excerpt which is more poetic.
Right.
Balancing and being for and against, we missed the clouds, and for a moment regretted it. Then as lightning, the mind ripped out in flashes of variations to reach the still pond.
Oh, wow, that's beautiful.
Right?
It's like you can feel his mind working.
Yeah, that concept back and forth.
For and against?
And then that moment of reflection. We missed the clouds.
Yeah, like a longing for something.
And then boom, this burst of insight.
The mind ripped out in flashes. Yeah, and finally reaching that stillness.
This still pond.
Yeah.
It's like a meditation.
It is. And then he gives us this very practical advice.
Okay, I like practical advice.
It's much better than arguing is to look at my watercolor palette.
So he'd rather paint than fight.
Yeah, I think so.
It's like the palette is this peaceful space for him.
Yeah, a place of beauty and potential.
Much better than getting caught up in an argument.
Yeah, and then he has this funny line about teaching.
Oh, yeah, he taught for a while,
He
right?
did. He said, the first year I assumed, the second year I capitulated, the third year I'm teaching.
Oh, that's classic. The
Yeah.
stages of a teacher.
Yeah, you come in all confident,
Thinking you know everything.
and then reality hits.
And you have to adapt.
Yeah, and then finally you find your groove.
You're actually teaching.
Yeah, and then we hear about his studio being this incredible wizard's den.
Oh, tell me more about that.
It was full of all these weird and wonderful objects. I don't know exactly, but it sounds like a real reflection of his mind.
Like a cabinet of curiosities?
Yeah, a place where inspiration could strike from anywhere.
I love that.
Me too! And then there's this whole Mr. Peanut persona.
Mr. Peanut. Wait, what?
Yeah, he would dress up as Mr. Peanut.
Like the planter's peanut guy.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
I know. And he would even sign his work as Mr. Peanut.
Oh, wow. So he's not taking himself too seriously.
Yeah, it's playful.
And maybe a little bit self-effacing.
Yeah, like he's not afraid to be silly.
And then he signs his work as anonymous later on.
Right. It's like he's really trying to get away from the ego.
Yeah, just letting the art speak for itself.
Yeah. And then finally we hear about how his work is full of ambiguity and hidden meanings.
Okay, so he's making the viewer work for it.
Yeah, he wanted people to really look closely and think for themselves.
Like a puzzle.
Yeah, he even built in these traps to mislead people at first.
Oh, wow. That's tricky.
Yeah, but it was all about encouraging people to come to their own interpretations.
Like a Gestalt psychologist.
Exactly. So cool. Okay, so now let's talk about some of the connections that were made in the book reviews
Okay.
between Camblin's work and Zen Buddhism.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so apparently his drawings were often seen as being like Zen koans.
Like little riddles.
Yeah, they were meant to disrupt your
That
thinking.
make you see things in a new way.
Exactly. And there was this explicit connection made in the book, Zen and the Art of Enlightenment.
Okay, so they're really drawing parallels between his art and Zen practice.
Yeah. And then there's this whole idea of art as meditation.
Mindfulness.
Yeah, being present in the moment.
And seeing beyond the surface.
Yeah, and then the I Ching was mentioned.
The Book of Changes.
Yeah, and how that relates to the cyclical nature of experience.
Yeah, everything is in flight.
And how that's reflected in Camblin's art.
So interesting.
Okay, so let's look at a specific example to bring all this together.
Okay, sounds
It's
good.
his painting, Hold Tight, #2.
Okay, what's it like?
It's a weathered wooden fence with a beach and ocean painted on it.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, and it evokes this feeling of nostalgia and impermanence.
Like time passing.
Yeah. So how do you see the Zen connection there?
Well, the fence could represent the barriers we create in our minds.
Okay.
The limitations we put on ourselves
And the weather.
shows that those barriers aren't permanent.
Right. They can break down over time.
And then the beach and the ocean.
Freedom.
Yeah, the boundless potential of an open mind.
I like that. And what about I Ching?
Well, hexagram 39 is obstruction,
Okay.
which represents the challenges we face in life.
The things that block our path.
Exactly. But the weathering of the fence suggests that those obstacles aren't permanent either.
Right. They can be overcome.
And then there's even a connection to the Tao Te Ching.
How so?
Well, the fence represents stillness structure,
Okay.
and the sea and sky represent flow.
So it's like that balance between being and becoming.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's really cool.
It is so much to unpack in just one painting.
Yeah. It's amazing. Okay. So to wrap things up,
Okay.
I wanted to share this final quote from Camblin.
Okay.
He said, "We have nothing to fear but fear ourself. When Zen monks say that we are always the Buddha, but we keep forgetting it most of the time, I knew that, but now I know it."
Wow, that's a powerful statement.
Right. It's about recognizing our own inner strength.
And wisdom.
Yeah. And how fear is often the only thing holding us back.
And that shift from knowing something intellectually to really knowing it.
Experientially.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, learner, just to sum up Bob Camblin.
A true original.
Yeah, he was an incredibly complex artist who blended paradox, personal experience, all these different influences, and this deep engagement with the human condition.
Yeah, his work is really thought-provoking.
It is, and it challenges us to look deeper, to embrace ambiguity.
To find our own meaning.
Yeah, so hopefully this deep dive has given you a good starting point,
Yeah, way into his world.
and maybe even spark some of those aha moments.
Those flashes of insight.
Yeah, so as you continue to think about Camblin's work,
Yeah.
I would encourage you to think about the barriers in your own life.
The fences.
Yeah, and how mindfulness and time might affect those limitations.
That's a good one.
And maybe check out the book Zen and the Art of Enlightenment,
Yeah, that seems like a great resource.
and revisit some of the other artists and thinkers we talked about.
Y.F. Escher.
Zen Buddhism.
The I Ching.
Yeah, there's so much to explore.
There is.
So, as a final thought,
Okay.
I would ask you this. What mystic switch could you flip today
Ooh, I like that.
to see the world in a new way?
Yeah, to open up to new possibilities.
Exactly.
That's a great question to leave us with.
Yeah, thanks for joining us, learner.
Thanks,
And
Learn.
a happy exploring.
Happy exploring.